She strutted across the cul-de-sac, flip-flops slapping like a metronome of entitlement, a rhythmic thwack-thwack-thwack echoing her self-importance. With a dramatic flourish, she pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the 16-year-old mowing his grandmother's lawn, her voice cutting through the humid Texas air. "You can't park your mama's car in your own driveway overnight," she snapped, her words dripping with a condescending sweetness that curdled quickly. "This is a whites-only block, sweetie, and we keep it pristine." She never noticed the kid, Richie, smiling a slow, knowing smile. She certainly didn't see him pull out a dog-eared, heavily highlighted copy of the 1987 subdivision bylaws from his back pocket, or that he'd spent his entire summer interning at the Fair Housing Clinic downtown, soaking up legal precedents like a sponge. Oh, she didn't see any of that. But by sunrise the very next morning, the HOA president, aka Karen, was off the board, her discriminatory rules shredded into confetti, and every single neighbor she'd bullied for years was standing on their porch, applauding like it was the 4th of July. Will you stand silent or stand strong? Join the fight against housing discrimination. Trust me, the details of how this all went down are even sweeter than that opening. Richie Hill had just survived 10th grade, a feat in itself, but he'd already practically memorized every Supreme Court housing case his grandmother, Mrs. Hill, could print out for him at the local library. And let me tell you, Mrs. Hill, a retired postal worker with a spine of steel and a heart of gold, could print a lot. She'd moved into Providence Village 15 years ago, long before the sleek new welcome sign promised refined living in cursive gold, a promise that often felt more like a threat. This development, a sprawling maze of identical brick fronts and zero-lot line lawns, sat about 35 minutes north of Dallas. It was a place of quiet streets, bake sale flyers, and precisely one woman who treated the entire subdivision like her personal fiefdom, Karen Whitlock. Karen, the HOA president, coupon queen, and self-appointed color guard of curb appeal conformity, was a force to be reckoned with, or so she thought. Most Saturdays, she patrolled the streets with a neon clipboard, a perfectly sharpened pencil, and an eagle eye for perceived infractions. She'd cite people for bird baths that leaned 2 degrees left of vertical, or for basketball hoops left on the curb longer than it took to make a quick grocery run. If your trash can lid had so much as a hairline crack, Karen's $75 fine arrived faster than Amazon Prime, sometimes even before you noticed the crack yourself. Her reign was absolute, her decrees unquestioned, and her neighbors, for the most part, simply sighed and paid up, too tired or too intimidated to push back. They were, in a way, living under invisible chains, restricted by rules that felt arbitrary and often, frankly, ridiculous. Richie, meanwhile, spent his June cutting grass, saving up every penny for a used Honda Accord that he'd spotted online, and practicing mock trial questions with his grandma. He was a bright kid, sharp as a tack, with a quiet determination that often went unnoticed by those who only saw his youthful exuberance. He parked his car in Mrs. Hill's driveway at precisely 9:05 p.m. every single evening after work or practice, never on the grass, never blocking the sidewalk, always within the lines. There was one sticker on his bumper that read "Future Civil Rights Attorney," a subtle declaration of his aspirations. But Karen, it seemed, only noticed his melanin and the basketball jersey he often wore. She didn't see the future lawyer. She just saw a kid who didn't fit her narrow, prejudiced view of what belonged in her neighborhood. The first Tuesday of July, the calm before the storm truly broke. Karen rang the doorbell, clutching a laminated sheet titled "Overnight Vehicle Pigmentation Standards," a paper nobody in the county, or indeed, the known universe, had ever seen before. It was a document born entirely from her own biases, designed not for community harmony, but for exclusion. It was a clear signal, a storm cloud looming over their sunlit neighborhood, that Richie was about to become the target of her petty tyranny, simply for existing. Karen's knock rattled the screen door like a woodpecker on espresso, insistent and irritating. "Evening, young man," she chirped, her voice syrupy sweet, but her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, betrayed the venom beneath. Article 14b prohibits dark-colored vehicles in driveways after dusk. Yours appears extra dark. Richie glanced at his grandmother's 2012 charcoal Camry, factory paint, spotless, and about as dark as a moonless night in Texas. He felt a familiar heat crawl up his neck, a mix of indignation and disbelief. "Ma'am," he began, his voice surprisingly steady. "I've read the entire covenant packet. Twice. There's no Article 14b. Karen's smile didn't falter, but it curled into something predatory. "Well, I just voted in last night. Emergency session, you know. Sometimes we have to act quickly to preserve our property values. You people always have such loud cars. It lowers property value." The thinly veiled insult hung in the air, a pungent odor of prejudice. She handed him a hot pink violation slip, an almost comically bright piece of paper that demanded $300 or threatened to tow at dawn. Richie's fingers tightened around the slip, but he managed to thank her politely, a quiet defiance simmering beneath his calm exterior. He closed the door, the latch clicking softly, and before the sound even faded, he was already opening his laptop. He might have been young, but he knew an injustice when he saw one, and he wasn't about to let this one slide. He was about to become a beacon, a metaphorical lightning bolt cutting through the dark veil of discrimination. If you're already itching to see how Richie flips the script, how he turns the tables on this HOA Karen, then you absolutely have to smash that like button and subscribe right now. Because karma isn't just a concept here. It's about to clock in for some serious overtime. Turns out Karen's emergency session was less a formal meeting and more a casual Chardonnay-fueled gathering. It consisted of her and her cousin Brenda, clinking glasses in the clubhouse, adding paragraphs to a bootleg Word document they'd cooked up themselves. No notice, no quorum, just two women playing fast and loose with community rules. Richie, with his summer internship experience still fresh, knew that wasn't how things worked. He dove into the Texas Property Code 209, and in under 8 minutes, he found a statute requiring 14-day notice and a homeowner quorum for any bylaw changes. Karen's impromptu rule change? Utterly invalid. But Richie wasn't just looking for invalidations. He was digging for gold. And boy, did he strike it. Buried deep on page 42 of the original 1987 covenants, he discovered something even juicier, a sunset clause. This critical, often forgotten provision stated that any rule not explicitly reaffirmed every 5 years automatically expired. The last reaffirmation? A dusty 1991. Translation: half the fines Karen bragged about collecting, the ones that had terrorized the neighborhood for years, weren't worth the paper they were printed on. They were nothing but air, smoke, and mirrors. But Richie wasn't just looking for invalidations. He was digging for gold. And boy, did he strike it. Buried deep on page 42 of the original 1987 covenants, he discovered something even juicier, a sunset clause. This critical, often forgotten provision stated that any rule not explicitly reaffirmed every 5 years automatically expired. The last reaffirmation? A dusty 1991. Translation: half the fines Karen bragged about collecting, the ones that had terrorized the neighborhood for years, weren't worth the paper they were printed on. They were nothing but air, smoke, and mirrors. Armed with this dynamite information, Richie drafted a polite, yet firm, certified letter to the HOA board. He meticulously cited the sunset clause and formally requested the immediate withdrawal of the bogus violation against him. Karen, predictably, responded with a doubling of his fine and the addition of a late administration fee of $150, just for good measure. She then tacked a new bill to his grandmother's car windshield with duct tape that, in the brutal 102-degree Texas heat, melted and left ugly, gluey scars on the clear coat. It was a petty, vindictive act designed to intimidate. Mrs. Hill, seeing the sticky mess and feeling the weight of years of HOA bullying, sighed, a weary sound. "Baby," she said, her voice soft, "let it go. We don't have money for lawyers to fight this." Richie looked at his grandmother, her face etched with concern, and a fierce resolve hardened in him. He kissed her forehead. "Good thing I'm cheap," he murmured, a mischievous glint in his eye. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for her, and for everyone else Karen had pushed around. The next week, after baseball practice, Richie traded his cleats for a bike. He spent his afternoons biking door to door, not just collecting signatures for a special meeting, but collecting stories. He met Mrs. Kim, a sweet elderly woman who had been fined for excessive daffodils in her front yard, a rule so absurd it was almost comical. He spoke with Mr. Patel, who had been threatened because his vibrant Diwali lights weren't deemed seasonally appropriate by Karen's arbitrary standards. Each story was another link in the chain of Karen's oppressive rule, another reason why someone needed to stand up. He listened, he empathized, and he explained. By Friday, Richie had 43 signatures, well above the 25% threshold required to force a special meeting. The seeds of resistance had been sown, and a wildfire of justice was about to ignite. The teens' courage was growing like wildfire, spreading hope through the community. The HOA clubhouse, usually a sterile, quiet place, that night smelled like stale coffee and a palpable undercurrent of fear mixed with anticipation. Folding chairs squeaked under the weight of nervous neighbors as they filled every seat, spilling out to line the walls. Karen, ever the picture of self-assured authority, opened the meeting with a pledge to keep Providence Village pristine for the right kind of families. The subtle, chilling implication of right kind hung in the air, a reminder of the discriminatory undercurrents that had plagued the community. Richie sat in the second row, his blazer a little too big, his shoes a little too shiny, but his eyes calm, focused, and utterly determined. When Karen, with a dismissive wave of her hand, asked if there was any new business, Richie raised his hand, slow and deliberate. I move to nullify all fines levied under expired bylaws and to remove any officer who knowingly enforced them, he stated, his voice clear and strong, cutting through the tension. Gasps fluttered around the room like startled pigeons, a ripple of shock and excitement. Karen, initially stunned, quickly recovered and chuckled, a condescending sound. "Sweetheart," she drawled, her voice dripping with patronizing amusement. "Parliamentary procedure is adorable, but you're out of order." Richie stood, holding a thick binder, its pages bristling with tabs and highlights. "Actually, under Texas Property Code 209.005, any member can demand a compliance review," he countered, his voice unwavering. "And I've done one. I've highlighted the sunset clause, the missing reaffirmations, and every single one of the fines collected since 2017. That's $47,800 total, by the way." The room fell silent, the air thick with disbelief. Then, with a flourish, he projected a meticulously organized spreadsheet onto the clubhouse wall. Names, dates, amounts. It was all there, laid bare for everyone to see. Mrs. Kim's daffodil shakedown appeared in a prominent yellow. Mr. Patel's festival citation glowed ominously in red. And then, the ultimate irony. Karen's own driveway showed a violation for unapproved taupe trim, a rule she had conveniently exempted herself from. The hypocrisy was stark, undeniable. "You haven't been enforcing community standards, Karen," Richie said, his voice steady, gaining power with each word. "You've been financing your vacations off illegal penalties. That's not oversight, it's extortion." The silence shattered. Neighbors murmured, then clapped. Then a roar of approval swept through the room. Brenda, Karen's cousin, tried desperately to adjourn the meeting, but the crowd, now emboldened, voted her down with a resounding shout. Someone immediately motioned for Karen's impeachment. The vote was unanimous, save for Karen's own trembling hand, which she feebly raised in protest, only to drop it in defeat. By 8:41 p.m., she was officially stripped of her title, her access to the Treasury, and her coveted neon clipboard. The cold, sterile HOA meeting room was transformed into a vibrant scene of community triumph. The teen's voice had indeed become a hammer, breaking the invisible chains of oppression. The aftermath felt like the final, triumphant scene in a feel-good movie, a collective sigh of relief washing over Providence Village. Karen, defeated and humiliated, slinked to her BMW, charcoal gray. Incidentally, a deliciously ironic detail, but paused when she spotted Richie standing beside it. He had waited for her, not out of malice, but out of a quiet, resolute sense of justice. "Just so you know," he said, his voice calm, "I also filed a complaint with HUD. They love open-end shut cases like this." The implication hung heavy in the air. Her troubles were far from over. Discrimination thrives in silence. Raise your voice. Demand justice. Word spread faster than a Texas wildfire on a dry summer day. Neighbors who had paid bogus fines received reimbursement checks within 10 days, a tangible sign that justice had indeed been served. The new board, elected with a mandate for fairness and transparency, voted to liquidate Karen's private landscaping fund, a slush fund she'd maintained with those illicit fines, to cover the reimbursements. Karen put her house on the market 2 weeks later, but foot traffic was scarce once Zillow comments mentioned toxic HOA history and whispered tales of discriminatory practices. She was, in essence, experiencing her own brand of instant karma, a bitter taste of the medicine she'd so readily dispensed. Meanwhile, Richie used the refunded $300 to buy Mrs. Hill a beautiful porch swing, a symbol of newfound peace and comfort. She used it every evening, waving at kids who now set up lemonade stands without fear of citation, their laughter echoing freely. The neighborhood, once stifled by Karen's arbitrary rules, began to bloom. They installed a little free library in the park, its paint color democratically voted on by the residents. Charcoal, a subtle, knowing tribute to the catalyst of their liberation. Providence Village had reclaimed its right to belong, its vibrant community spirit finally unleashed. Stories like this, of a young, informed voice rising against injustice, prove that one person can torch discrimination faster than any expired rule ever could. Richie's courage wasn't just about a parking spot. It was about standing up to prejudice, about breaking the invisible chains of systemic inequality that can hide even in suburban cul-de-sacs. If you believe housing should be fair, if you believe in the power of an individual to make a difference, then share this video. Drop your own HOA horror story in the comments, and hit subscribe for more karma delivered on time and under budget. Because discrimination may start with one petty rule, one biased glance, or one hateful word, but justice spreads like wildfire when we all decide to stand up. Justice is not given, it is demanded. Stand with us to end housing discrimination now.